So we're here at Staffordstown Farm today as part of a project that is funded through Creative Ireland, and it's in an effort to try and help tell the stories of people who were participants in the pre-draft public consultation on the Meath Biodiversity Action Plan 2025 to 2030. That helped us garner responses from the public and help us to understand what was most important to locals in County Meath with regards to how we should be going about protecting biodiversity. So the process was hugely useful for us to collect shared memories of how biodiversity has changed across the Meath landscape in the last number of decades. Because if you don't understand what you've lost, you don't really understand what is possible for the habitats in your locality. I think there's still a lot of value in the human stories, the individual experiences and memories of people in a local area that can add a different perspective, and I think it makes the story of biodiversity loss and how our landscapes have changed that little bit more relatable.
So my childhood was, I suppose, one of the era before there was any electronics or anything. We had storybooks and we had being out in nature. And so yes, my memories would be of what was my normal childhood: picking blackberries, picking mushrooms, making jam, learning about bird calls, being told about the different leaves on the trees and what the trees were for and what they gave us and the bounty that came from nature.
We just spent our days outside. We just came in when we were called for our dinner. We were playing in the fields, playing out the back of the house under a big chestnut tree. And coming home from school was a great time for looking at nature. And again, we didn't realise we were looking at nature. This is just what happened. There was a caterpillar, this hairy caterpillar, used to cross the roads because there were many more butterflies at that time, and the caterpillar would cross the road and there would be loads of them, but you couldn't look at them because somebody said it was going to rain if you saw this caterpillar, and we called them a God's horse.
When I was young, my life seemed to be always out in nature. From a very early age, we were always out in fields. We seemed to have a great desire to walk walls of all nature, jump over gates, spend our days. Really, I suppose, the fields were our play space, and that's where we met. That's where we, imagined all our little games. There were so many cowslips in fields then, and we used to suck this sweet stuff out of cowslips, but we didn't realise at the time it was nectar.
So I would have started fishing properly this river in 1979 as a teenager. And what I would say to you is, certainly in the early 80s and late 90s, what I would say is the amount of fly life on the river was profuse, really strong. I used to spend most of my time, we'd be waiting for what we would call the evening rise, where basically you would come down in the evening when all the fly life would come out on the water and the trout would be rising everywhere. And I mean everywhere. The water would be literally thick with rising fish. And I will never forget that for as long as I live. But I would find then, year on, every season, that was sort of like being dialed down. The hatches of the flies were not as big, they were not as vast. The evening rises were not as prolific. Then it got to a point where it was starting to go right down altogether. And as a result of it, I actually stopped fishing. And then the large trout as well. I wasn't seeing large trout anymore. They were becoming more and more scarce.
There was much greater diversity, and we knew all our wildflowers and our trees. And I remember going into a field with my father, and there was chicory growing in it. There was marjoram growing in it. There were flowers that you hardly see anymore, like the corn marigold. like red poppies. You have to plant those now. People talk about wildflower meadows. We just had them. The species of grasses were much, much greater. We had cocksfoot, Yorkshire fog, false oat.
A lot of our time was in ditches, and we were in ditches regularly, collecting frog spawn, watching them grow, looking after them, bringing them back to where they came from, and I suppose understanding that circle of life for them. So it was a very adventurous time. Certainly where I live now, frogs are not as obvious now. I often watch, I walk our small roads and I can see ditches with water, but unfortunately they seem to be probably more polluted than frogs are kind of like able to survive in, even though they're quite resilient.
Well, when I was young, I suppose every Sunday after lunch it was customary for us to go for a family drive, and that would be either to the woods for a walk or the sea for a walk. And then on the way home, I suppose the key thing then in the summer's evening that you'd always notice that by the time you got home, the windscreen used to be covered in flies. And the dad would be complaining that he can't see out and trying to get the water and the wipers to go. But anyway, it was interesting because over time, you notice now there were very few flies, if any, on the windscreen.
We moved here in the 1950s, and the farm has somewhat changed, but not enormously so. So lots of the things that were around then are still here by virtue of the kind of farming that we do. It seems to me that there is low-hanging fruit that could be grasped fairly easily. And one of the ones is just the hedgerow management. All of us farmers grew up believing that a hedge that was trimmed to within 3 inches of its life was the right kind of a hedge to have. And you see an awful lot of that still, particularly on the roadside. They just really hammer them with the flail machine. And we've taken a different view, so we have a fairly expansive hedgerows in the A shape, which is the recognised shape for doing it. The only thing it takes is just different instructions for the guy on the hedge cutter. And I think that could be a very easy thing to do.
I remember walking just the 100 metres just beyond my house is a whole bank of ladies' bedstraw and loads of butterflies, and that stretch of road was never ever disturbed by herbicides or anything. So there was loads of vetch, tufted vetch, bush vetch, and the little trefoils, loads of them. They're all gone. There's nothing there now except some ivy. Sad. Most of the things that have been lost, I think, have been lost by herbicides. When you lose the flowers, you lose the butterflies, the bees, and all the insects whose names I don't even know that rely on these plants.
I remember hearing curlews, you could hear corncrakes. We missed them, but people all said, "Oh, that's a sign of rain." If the curlew sang, or if the corncrake was singing at night time, it kept me awake all night. But they're gone now. We don't have them. So there were a lot of changes. I do surveys over in the west of Meath and the east of West Meath, and literally numbers are dropping. Areas that I might have seen, for argument's sake, 100 wetland, whether it's ducks, teals or whatever, I might be lucky now to see 5, 10, So that to me is the big significant difference. I haven't seen a curlew in my area for years and years and years, never mind lapwing or any of those,
When I was younger, obviously, everything was pointed out to us and we were taught about everything, and everything was part of the story. And I suppose because we had storybooks, my father was a marvellous man with inculcating a respect for nature and an awe about nature and an appreciation of nature in us as children.
So we're hugely excited to roll out and begin implementing the Meath Biodiversity Action Plan 2025 to 2030 and get behind all those communities that are already playing their part in helping to solve this biodiversity crisis, whether it's supporting local pollinator plan actions, whether it's various different tree planting initiatives through the overarching objective of the right tree in the right place, or it could be managing or eradicating invasive species. It's our job to get behind all of that and help the local authority play its part and set a course for a nature positive trajectory.